Hello! This is episode 25, year 1, and many more to come. If you have an ongoing career, if you're stuck and want to talk about your path, or if you're retired and wish to share your wisdom with our listeners, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Today, the interview is with Margaret Cooney, a funding and fundraising professional in the charity sector. Welcome, Margaret. You said you've been most of your professional life a fundraiser. Well, you've been in the charity sector as
and the arts sector as well.
And the arts, okay. And what took you to that path?
When I graduated from university, at the time, because of the age that I am, there was a really high unemployment level in the UK. And I think as well, partly because of me and the background that I come from, I had a strong sense of I wanted to do things that were a public service. I wasn't drawn to the business world. I was drawn to what we would call the public sector. And for the first few years, I kind of drifted around, but I was always very interested in culture and the arts. I wasn't particularly, I wasn't a musician or an actor or a visual artist, but I really was knowledgeable about that world. And I got a job working for a regional arts council in the north of England. And so that sort of set me off on that stage of my career. And I was very young at the time. And basically we gave out money to all of the arts across that particular bit of the north of England. I mean, I was quite junior, so I wasn't one of the more influential decision makers. Mm-hmm. But I learned a great deal during that role, and then actually did go out eventually and work in a couple of venues, theatre. I ran a venue actually in the northeast of England, which was a multi-arts venue, a small one, but that kept me busy. And and then I kind of then went and worked for another regional funding council, but in a different part of England, in the east of England, which is very, very different because it was just more inaccessible in places, and there was fewer venues and big cultural landmarks there. But again, that was an interesting role that I had to, it was very interesting actually. I had to travel around all the time to a part of the country I didn't know at all. So if you look at your map of the UK, you have a big bump on one side of it. Yeah. It was that big bump that goes out into the North Sea. I'm not from that part of the country, I'm the other side. And it was quite intriguing. I was based in a very historic city called Cambridge, which is very famous for the university. Yes. But it was a really weird place because Cambridge is very dominated by the university. And for the locals, it's just not that great. There's so much culture that happens within the university walls, which are cut off from the ordinary mortals. But I used to have to travel around sort of all over. And yeah, it was a strange role. And I used to have to try and persuade local authorities, local councils to fund arts officers in their patch, and I would match fund if they came up with some money. So I did that.
Was that a job you applied for, or how did that happen? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was. Well, I'd done the first role in the northeast of England, in Newcastle. I wanted to leave there. I was thinking about moving back to London, but I didn't want to kind of commit to doing that because London's a tough and challenging city. I should say that I did live in London at the very start of my career for a few years, but left because it was just expensive. But yeah, so I moved to Cambridge, which was very, very near to London. And I applied for the job because I thought that's something I can do. I know how to work with local authorities. I'm not someone who deals directly with the artists. I'm not a visual arts specialist or a performing arts specialist, but I can talk, I can help local authorities program their culture activities. So that's why I got that job. It was great for a while, but I think then about sort of 4 or 5 years into it, I started to feel a little bit disenchanted. I did a really interesting MA course actually when I was working in the east of England. And it was the European Cultural Planning Master's degree run by an Italian. I think he's a professor now, Professor Franco Bianchini. And it was a real kind of ahead of its time course. And I met some really interesting people on it. They came from all over Europe. I really enjoyed that, but it wasn't enough to keep me in the cultural sector, unfortunately. I got kind of just a little bit, I don't know why I got disillusioned. I think I do this from time to time. And I would say to anybody who's listening to your podcast, just follow your instinct. I wanted to do something a bit more. I felt perhaps it wasn't as meaningful. It wasn't making a bigger difference to people's lives. So it was at the time in the UK when we had Tony Blair was elected. And even though his name is slightly tarnished now because of the Iraq war, back in the sort of 90s, it was a really exciting time. It felt, we were released from all of these years of different policies, and there was lots of money going into education and public health and the environment, which was really kind of new. And a new initiative was set up by that government. And the National Lottery had come into being, which was, these things happen in Europe, don't they? You buy your lottery ticket for however many euros or pounds.
Yes.
And in the UK, some of that money goes towards grant giving and good causes. And there was a new distributor to give money to good causes, health, education, and the environment. It was called the New Opportunities Fund, and it was to be the regional manager in the east of England. And I saw it and I thought, I like the look of that. Got an interview and got the role. And the ethos behind this lottery distributor was, what they discovered was that poorer people tended to buy the lottery tickets. So in the disadvantaged communities in England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales, or Northern Ireland, it was those communities that were playing the lottery, but they weren't getting that kind of payback. And so when the Blair government came in, they said, well, these communities deserve to have more money, and we'll create this new lottery distributor and we will make sure that money goes back to those places. And that I found very exciting. But what I was feeling was in my region, which was probably wealthier. I mean, it had some pockets of disadvantage, certainly, but it wasn't exciting enough. I wanted to be close to the centre of the action. So I started to spend a lot more time going, and it was handy because I lived in Cambridge. I was going backwards and forwards to London a lot and getting involved in the policy team meetings. I wanted to be tested and challenged more. What happened in the end was we created a program, this lottery distributor, that was it needed sort of strong input from the regional team, and I was one of the regional team. And I became the sort of lead person. And when this program, it was very, very adventurous, it was a very different way of funding communities, happened. A lot of stuff, the organisation that was going to take it on and had been awarded the £50 million to do it, basically fell apart. So they needed to put in some interim measures, and I got a secondment from my job to go and work in this organisation, which was based in London, but was running a £50 million fund. And I had to kind of do that for a year, and that was incredibly challenging for lots of reasons, but not the least of which was it was my first really proper experience of having to manage people, and I was actually quite old. And I realised that to get on career-wise, I needed to do that people management thing. Prior to this, I'd been one of these people that just bounced around. I reported into people, but not really anybody reported into me. So that was, it was a bit of it was a tough role, but I learned so much from it. And I managed to get the thing going and kick-started it and got everything kind of right. All the various stakeholders were happy, although one or two didn't like me, but I just had to be really tough. And then I went back to my employers, and when I went back, everything was changing. We were going to do a merger with another grant-giving lottery distributor. And so I became a change manager, as they call it, where you have to kind of do all the restructuring and make people redundant. And in fact, I got the job of heading up the old team that I was a part of. So obviously all that experience of the secondment stood me in, it stood me in good stead, because I could take on a role like that after that year. And that was pretty tough, actually. It's not very nice having to make people redundant or restructure things. And there was a lot of stress and a lot of traveling around. But I think, I learned again a huge amount from that. The important thing is to be honest and with people and communicate with them, I think was the key thing. And then when we got the brand new merged organisation, now when I look back on it, I really probably should have kissed it all goodbye and moved on. But I was encouraged to apply for a role as a director and to run England in this new sort of body. And I did. I remember giving a terrible interview, and I used to be very good at giving interviews. And I think it was partly my lack of enthusiasm, but I got the job. Yeah, I had to kind of build this new team out. I think at that point, I was responsible for a very large team, 90 people across. I mean, there were many more divisions and directorates, but my bit, I had small teams of people in every region of England. And we did policy and communications and helped people get money, really. We didn't assess grants because that was a different team.
What's grant assessment?
Well, grant assessment is if you apply for a fund, you say, I'd really like to run this project. You fill in a form, and then somebody looks at it and decides, marks you. Basically, it's like almost doing a sort of exam paper, and decides whether you get that money. Well, then it'll go to a committee, and the committee will, with a recommendation, and the committee will either agree with your recommendation or overturn it and decide that it will or won't be funded. And my team didn't do that. My team actually kind of did a lot of the stakeholder management in the regions, and also told the sort of central teams about how things were performing, did a lot of PR communications about what we were doing, because we ran lots and lots of multiple different strands of funding. They also kind of dealt with people who were really annoyed that they hadn't been funded, and there was a lot of that. And then they also sort of helped develop new programs. But the big thing that I did in that job was I set up a fairly kind of, what I like to think of it as a groundbreaking program. It's still running. It's independent of the lottery, because that's how I set it up with my team. It's a really kind of radical experiment in community development, and it's called Local Trust. And that was a big, big project. That was the largest investment that the lottery had ever made at that point in England. And I'm very proud of it, because it's done a lot of really great things. So it gives 150 very, very disadvantaged neighbourhoods in England £1 million to invest. And these neighbourhoods are between 3 and 10,000 people. And they had 15 years to spend that money, and they could spend it however they wanted to. Well, obviously they couldn't do bad things, but you know what I mean. But they could perhaps decide that they wanted to set up a community energy, local broadband, or they could do some housing projects. It wasn't kind of ordinary grants from the lottery come with a lot of strings attached. This was much more driven by those people in that community. And when I finished that project, that was it. I basically made myself redundant. I couldn't really, after that, I just thought, what else is there to do, really? I've kind of gone as far as I can go. So then there was a beginning of a sort of new chapter, really. But after years of giving out money, I was on the other side.
The easy part is actually to have the money, and the hard part is to find the money, right?
Yeah, there are challenges on both sides, I think. It's quite interesting now when I look back on those days, because I didn't realise, I think, what an incredible position of influence and power it was. But I never felt like that. I always felt as though I'm a public servant. I'm only as good or me and my team and my colleagues, we're only as good as the people who apply to us. They're the ones with the great ideas. They're the ones that the passion. All we do is kind of have a process to get that money to them, make sure they're not doing anything illegal, make sure that they've got the right kind of governance and things in place to manage the money when they get it. That's all we do. It's the people out there. So I never made a big deal of it in that. I think, I think some people do kind of trade off their power in those kinds of roles. I never felt like that. And people have said that to me as well. People have commented on that. I was much more approachable and open to the outside. But I definitely had things that I was more interested in than perhaps, there were certain things I was more passionate about in that role. And it was an incredibly privileged role to have too. I met some fantastic people. So I think I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but there's things like the Eden Project in Cornwall, the big kind of biospheres, the domes. It's really radical.
Yeah.
They were one of the clients I dealt with quite a lot. Just some amazing stuff, really. The people doing incredible things that, I'm enormously proud of having had some hand in helping those things happen.
That's fantastic. Yes, because you make that possible, and also people's dreams come true, and without public funding, it wouldn't be possible. Is there any sort of accountability or reporting that has to be done?
Loads. Yeah. Grant management, and we got involved in that quite a lot. My team did as well, but there were also lots and lots of grant managers. So once a grant went out to an organisation, they would have to submit, reports at intervals to us. And if there was a problem, as often as not, a member of my team would get involved and go down and visit. But the thing about it is, it's all about really making sure that you communicate. Communication is so important. That that you have to kind of keep the funder informed, and if anything you're uncertain about, call them, because they're there to help you.
Mm-hmm. Right. So after being a funder, you have then become a fundraiser. So going on the other side of the
not really sure how that happened, but it did. Yeah. I think people thought, oh, she worked in that kind of world, so she must be good at fundraising. It's a completely different thing. It's really interesting, although I actually turned out to be quite good at it. And I calculated the other day how much I've helped or directly raised since I left my job at the lottery. And I think I've been involved in about sort of £7 million worth of fundraising, which isn't bad going. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
But it's a funny one. It's hard. It's really difficult doing that. I kind of know what funders look for. Unfortunately for me, I'm not particularly, one of my big challenges throughout my career has been hopeless with numbers. I really am. I can't, I was always very bad at maths at school, and it's haunted me all my life. It really has. And I always tried to find jobs where I didn't need to deal with the numbers. I mean, I know that sounds mad given that I was involved, but as I said to you, I didn't really, a lot of my role was about policy and words and communication. So yeah, when you're putting together a funding bid and you need to come to the budget bit, that's where I find someone who's good at maths or accounting.
And leave it to them.
Yeah, I'll do all the words, but please leave the numbers to somebody else. But yeah, I've done some kind of interesting stuff. So I've I helped an arts venue in Manchester get £1 million. That was great. And it's a brilliant venue called Islington Mill. That I was part of a team for that. I've done some, a local heritage bid. I've kind of lost count of what I've been involved in. I've just finished helping a group of really young artists, actually, who are from a Black Afro-Caribbean background, put together a bid to the Arts Council. They just called me up as a friend of a friend of a friend and said, can you give us a hand? And I do. I've had a couple of jobs as well since I left the lottery. So one of the jobs I had was I was a director of development for a youth charity, which is closed now. But I got money for that. It was a charity that helped young people volunteer and help them get skills for the future.
Hmm.
And I was also for a year and a bit the chief executive of a charity, a startup charity, and I raised all the money to get that going and did its digital strategy, and it was an online hub for information for charities and social enterprises across London, and I got that going. That was hard work. That was the most recent job I did. I enjoyed up to a point, but in England, the charity sector is quite interesting in the way in which it's boards and chief executives. The charity that I was employed to start up was meant to get a new board, and when I kind of got the money in place, the new team, all the strategy, everything was great. The old board decided they were going to stick around and take it back to what it used to be, which I thought was a bit awful, really. So I thought, I don't want to stick around, I'm going to leave. So I left. And then the pandemic happened.
Oh, yeah. Bummer.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was kind of thinking then at that point, I want to have a rethink about what I do next.
And before we go to the next step, now you have done fundraising. Was it on a freelance basis? Were you working for one organization or for several?
Both. So the youth charity, I was a paid employee, and that was my role to manage the fundraising team. And when I was the chief executive of the charity, obviously that was a paid role. That was it. But then all the other stuff I've been involved in, the little projects, that's been as a freelancer.
Okay, so you get a commission out of the funding you find?
Yeah, it's a mix, really. Or you get a daily rate. It depends. It really depends.
And what would you say is the important skills to have in order to fundraise?
You need to be able to get over a brief very quickly and understand it, and be very confident about asking questions. Because, if you come in as a freelancer and they just hire you because they think you can, anyone can fill in a form. They write, they're literate and numerate. But it doesn't mean to say they really understand what this project's going to do. And I think there's two things. If you're a grant-giving body, a funder, you can smell where they've brought in a hired hand, a mercenary. It's not really coming from them. It's not authentic. And similarly, I think if you're a mercenary, actually just try and understand what the organisation's there to do, because you walk away from it in the end. They've got to pick up the pieces and manage the project. You have to really be sure that the organisation that you're getting the money for is able to manage the project. And I think there was one experience I had with a project, and we didn't get the money, and I was really glad, because the people that I was working with, they just weren't interested. They just wanted me to take it off their hands. And I kept reminding them that this was a pretty big thing and that they needed to engage more. And they just, kept, no. So I'm glad that funder spotted that, really. It was a really valuable learning experience for me.
I see. And how about connections? In order to find funders, do you need to have your own portfolio? Or do you just do cold calls or knock at doors or send emails like a salesman would do, let's say? Or how do you approach?
When you work in an organisation, so when I worked in the youth charity, we subscribed to services that told you who was open. So there's databases, and you pay a monthly fee, and these databases are up to date, and they'll tell you, this fund is open, this is the detail, and they can just kind of log on and see that there's a charitable trust that's funding young people to do something. Or you just have to do your research, or you may have personal relationships. Obviously, for public sector funders, it's not like that. They are open and transparent. For the smaller, I think, the small foundations that are funded by private individuals, a lot of that is about, do you know someone there? Have you got a connection? Because a lot of them keep it quite quiet. It really depends. I'm not as knowledgeable about that side of things, I have to say. I'm kind of, private donors or those family-run foundations, but I'll come back to that because this has been a little twist in my tail. But yeah, so there's different skill sets, I think, that fundraisers can have. I like researching a project. I really enjoy that. That's something I find really exciting, but I actually really hate being a fundraiser. I keep saying to people, stop asking me to help fundraise for you. I don't want to do it, but it keeps happening to me. It's quite crazy. But then I do get a kick from something being successful. So,
what don't you like about fundraising?
I think the thing I don't like about it actually is because I've been used to being in the driving seat of something, it's quite hard to let go as well sometimes. If you do really enjoy it and you do all this work and then you think, I'm going to have to let go of this now and someone else is going to run it and do it.
I see.
But it is hard work. So when I was the chief exec of that charity, all you ever do is run round. You know, you can't do the things that the charity is there to do because all you ever think about is, I've got to get that money in, I've got to get the money in to cover that post, or I've got to get the money in to cover that project. So all of your life is taken up with chasing after funds.
Okay, I see. We haven't talked about your studies. Is that relevant, what you studied?
Well, I mentioned the MA course, I suppose, didn't I? But yeah, no, I mean, it's weird. I think, the age I am, and I'm happy to be fully open and honest, I'm 2 weeks shy of my 60th birthday.
Oh, wow.
When I came out of university in the early 1980s, and I did a history degree, it bears absolutely no relation to what I do now. I suppose the only thing that it gave me was an ability to write quite well.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I didn't think I was going to be a historian. Actually, when I did my master's degree, sort of about 15 years after that, the course I did, it was called cultural planning, but it was basically a cultural geography. It was a geography master's, but not about glaciers and landscape. It was cultural geography, and I really loved that. And I actually realised I wish I had done something like that. I wish that had been my degree because I think I'd be doing something very different now. I think it was a great time the UK's changed a lot since the early 1980s when I was at college. But I think what my university education did for me was it gave me an opportunity to meet people from very different backgrounds. It gave me an opportunity to kind of move away. I mean, the city I grew up in, Liverpool, went through terrible unemployment and still struggles now, even though it's a lively, vibrant city. It is, a place of high unemployment and deprivation. And I got away from that. And I think my university education, and I worked hard to get to university. It gave me that opportunity to move away from it.
And so what about the third part of your life? And
the latest chapter in my life.
The latest chapter, yes.
So I kind of left off, I sort of said that I left that charity for the first time in my entire life. I took a bit of time out. I thought that was hard. I want to have several months off. So I took sort of from September through to December 2019, just went away a lot. Went to France, Spain, can't remember, went to Ireland, all over the place, had a really lovely time. And then thought, I better start looking for a job. And then the start of the year, January 2020, I started doing some freelancing for a really amazing charity in England. Love it. It's a fabulous organisation. It trains people to campaign on social justice issues, well, on anything really, campaigning charity. And I was doing a project for them, which did involve fundraising, but it was also going to mean that if this project happened, I would run the project. So it was great for me. And it was a part-time role and I had other things I wanted to do. And then we all know what happened in March 2020. Mm-hmm. And that really hit that world so hard. I mean, so I'd written a fundraising strategy for this charity as well. And it was a catastrophe. At the same time, I was also I've always been, even when I was quite young in my early 20s, I always got invited to be on the boards of organizations, not as a big director in a big company, as charities or arts organizations. And I'd sort of not done that for a while. And a couple of people said to me, you should try and, be a chairperson of an organization. And I was sort of, I don't know. And then I got a call out the blue from an old acquaintance who said, hey, Margaret, I've got this really interesting woman. He's an academic. He's a lecturer at the University of London. And he said, she lectures on my course. She runs this really interesting food poverty project. I think you'd probably like it. And they're looking for a new chairperson. I've mentioned your name. Anyway, she got in touch with me. I looked at what she was doing. I thought, God, this is really unusual and interesting. Met her almost a year ago to, this week. We chatted for a long time. And then I put in a sort of application, very short application, and became the chair of it. Now, the whole point of this charity, it's not a charity, actually, it's a social enterprise, which is different. And I won't bore anybody who's listening with the distinctions. But it's a sort of business, but it does get grants as well. And it helps people who don't eat well and can't cook well. And this is a real issue in the UK. We have probably highest obesity rates in Europe, and food poverty is a real problem in the UK at the moment. And she just had a really unusual approach. And I thought, I quite like this, and I quite like her. She's really honest. She'd made a lot of money working in the city. And I did think she was going to be one of these people who'd come out from, a lot of money, and she'd have the solution and it'd be all about the market. And she wasn't like that at all. She's very refreshing. But the sad thing was, as soon as I became the chairperson of her organisation, of course, all of this happens in classes, face-to-face classes, and we work with really vulnerable people, take them on a month-long journey of skilling them up. And although it's to do cookery, it's not really about cooking skills. It's about helping people be more financially resilient, giving people confidence. It does so much more, although the cooking is the vehicle. It's really very interesting. It's called Bags of Taste, and it's fascinating. And we couldn't do it. And so I was called her, in sort of early April, Easter last year, and said, hey, how are you doing? I'm really excited. And she said, I've been crying all night because I've realised everything I've built up is just about to go down, the drain. And I said, no, it's not. We'll try and do these things virtually. It gave me something to do during the lockdown, because together she and I raised £100,000. We've doubled the size of it. Our virtual mentoring model has been really successful. And even though some of the people that we work with are really quite poor, and some of them don't have smartphones. Just before I came on this chat with you, I've just been talking to her actually, and she said, do you know anybody who's got old smartphones? And I found 2 really ancient old iPhones in my drawer. And I said, well, I do. So I'm going to post them so that some people can have them. But we do it over WhatsApp. We'll even do it over the old-fashioned telephone for some people, because older people don't really engage with digital technology. But we've mentored 1,600 people.
Oh, wow.
And over 50% of them have completed the course. They're all reporting huge savings in their food budgets. It's been really fantastic to do that. And then alongside that, of course, I have set up a business with an old colleague. So this, I am kind of,
busy.
I'm not as busy as I want to be, because I'd like us to have more money earn more money through our business. Because all of the stuff I do with Bags of Taste, of course, is voluntary. Yeah. But so that was also another project. So it's never too late. And I never thought I'd be someone running a business at, a relatively advanced stage in my career.
Yes, so it's very inspiring, fascinating. Thank you so much, Margaret.
No problem.
I'm going to follow you and on the progress of your enterprises and your projects. And I will definitely be very happy to maybe speak with you again another day.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really, I hope it inspires some people. It's not a successful career, but it's certainly not been dull. The takeaway from this is, especially if there are people who listen to this who are younger, your career is going to be really different to perhaps somebody of my age, where there were jobs, not for life. I've been made redundant a couple of times, but you could have a 15-year shot at a job. That's not happening anymore. And
No.
so being able to be adaptable and change is really going to be, I think, a skill that people will need in future years.
No, for sure, yes. And I hope in the future to be able to interview Yuval Harari. I don't know if you know him, and he's a historian, and that's exactly what he said. Like the way that we will work in the future, and it's already happening, is like forget about 10, 15, 20 years at a company. It will be every 2 to 5 years you will change your job, and this will become normal, and it is already becoming normal.
Definitely.
And, a generational gap also between us and our parents. And us and our children. So it's definitely happening, and we need to be to grow resilience and to become adaptive and in order to thrive.
Yeah, and I think also we should all be working 3 or 4 days a week. It just makes so much sense. And I think jobs with artificial intelligence, there'll be fewer jobs perhaps. So we need to think smarter about how people work.
Yes.
And what they can do outside of their work lives, like doing things like the volunteering roles that I really get a lot from doing that, chairing that social enterprise. It's fantastic. I really enjoy it.
Yes.
And, if you could free time up for people to do things like that, I think the world could be a better place.
For sure. Thank you so much, Margaret.
No problem. Thank you. Goodbye.
If you want to work in the nonprofit sector, one day or another, you'll be faced with fundraising, either directly or indirectly. Whether this is something for you or not, it's up to you to decide. But I hope Margaret helped shed some light for you. Stay tuned and please like our Instagram page that is managed by Asia and Ilaria. Thank you, girls.